That was 185 on the metronome, so I'm definitely getting closer. But it has been very difficult, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this video is the feeling of hitting a plateau when you're trying to learn something, especially a physical skill. So what's happened as I've worked on this is at first I made a lot of progress, and it got a lot easier very quickly. And then it's been really difficult to get at the next few points, the next few points, the next few points. And I wanted to point out that this is something that is very typical when you're practicing a physical skill, and a lot of playing musical instruments involves physical skills. So for students and people learning music out there, you want to be aware that even if you feel like you're going backwards or you're not getting anywhere fast enough or it's slowed down, that's perfectly normal, and just take a breath and keep going. Which is what I'm doing. I'm almost there, not quite. Keep going. So plateaus are normal. And I wanted to point out, as one more piece of that, the difference between learning facts, which is part of music. There's a lot of facts to learn, like what is a treble clef, what is a bass clef, how do you read music, how do you play by ear, what's a scale, what's a different type of scale, how many beats in a measure for a rhythm, and so forth. But there's also skill learning. And there are the physical technique aspects of the skill of playing piano or another instrument. There's mental skill aspects where you have to recognize things quickly, recognize and turn them into physical actions, or remember or analyze, quickly figure out the pattern that you're seeing, you know, not have to go through slow thinking steps, but just get it. And all of these things are things that have to be learned. And facts come more quickly than the other things. You can learn a fact like that and put it in your memory pretty well. But the skills, that's what takes a while. So, you know, don't be hard on yourself if you find some parts difficult. And one other, another thing I wanted to mention. In my last video, it bothered me all week. I said that I thought of my arm as a mechanical arm moving back and forth across at whatever speed, which is fine, but it occurred to me that that's not a very musical term, and a lot of people might look at that and think, why is she saying music should be mechanical? That's terrible. So I wanted to be a little more clear. That happened to be the image that came to my mind. But what I was thinking of is something that very efficiently floats and moves smoothly. So perhaps I should just say a free-floating human arm. And, you know, I can move like this very fluidly and very easily, you know, without worrying about what timing my fingers are coming down and what the muscles in here are doing. So what my point was that I want to remember as I'm doing an arpeggio that a lot of the motion is simply here. It's just a smooth motion down or up. And then there's some coordination of getting the fingers in there, but you need to remember that it's not all this kind of motion, because that will slow you down, thinking too much about that. There's this arm that can easily carry you across the arpeggio, and you want to cultivate that. So that was my point. So music does not need to be mechanical. It's just something that came to mind as an idea for me. Another thing I wanted to mention related to plateaus and frustration and things aren't going right. I've noticed a lot of times that when I'm on an off day or when I'm trying to do a speed that I'm not quite ready for, it feels like the metronome is playing pranks on me. And if that was a real drummer, I'd swear that they were messing with me and changing their speed. But of course it's automatic, it's electrical, so it's doing the right thing. And it can feel like sometimes that speed is changing and you're trying to keep up with it, but it's going faster and going slower, and of course it's you that's going faster and slower. But that happens sometimes. You know, if you're tired or your brain is tired or you're distracted, that can happen. And again, don't despair, just take a breath and move on. So I wanted to point out my prankster metronome that I've been encountering. And then one last thing, I wanted to talk about a technical tool that helped me while I was practicing this week. So I was having a lot of trouble with evenness, So something I started doing occasionally in my practice is, instead of just playing steady rhythm da, 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 in pairs or triplets da, 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 I started doing little two-note slurs, either like this, with the first note being like on a downbeat and the second note on an upbeat, or with the first note being on an upbeat and the second one being on a downbeat, more like this. And so that seems fine, whatever. But if I do that at different speeds, it's very difficult. I cannot do that at the same speed that I can play it evenly. But what it did, by practicing it at slower speeds and gradually getting faster with each hand, it made my other type of playing the arpeggio smoother, clearer, more even. And I'm not sure I can explain exactly how this works in the brain, but that kind of thing, lots of teachers will recommend. It's the idea of changing how you're practicing something, and it somehow helps you get it to come out the original way. And I think one of the things it's doing is it's forcing your brain to think about more things at a time than you were thinking about before. And it challenges you, and if you can get all the things to play together well, then each thing is obviously easier. And also, when I'm doing that exercise, I have to change, in order to make those slurs sound the way they do, I have to change the volume that I'm using. So there's a loud on the first and a quieter on the second, or the other way around. I also have to change the articulation that I'm using. Articulation being how much do you smoothly go from one sound to the next versus letting go in between. And staccato is a perfect example of a type of articulation. So changing the volume and the articulation are two things that my brain had to think about, and that my hand probably had to do slightly different physical movements, and it had to overcome the things that helped it do that, which made it easier for it to overcome the original things it was trying to do, which is just play in an even pattern. So I can't explain all the details behind it, but it definitely helped, and it's so much more even than it was last week. So anyhow, I wanted to point out those things, tell you not to be upset by plateaus or prankster metronomes, and clarify that mechanical arm is just a weird image I came up with, and not the way that you should play music all the time. So until next week, thank you.